I will teach you how to manipulate, as always. Today, I want to focus on attractive women. I want you to stop overvaluing them and realize they are simple, manipulable humans. I will teach you to read patterns. What behaviors reveal fragility behind a smile? How do attention and social media turn qualities into chains? And what specific questions would separate performance from substance? You will learn to filter social noise without drama, to observe, evaluate, and decide if someone deserves your time. I will show you emotional self-protection tactics like rationing your attention, setting boundaries that are respected, and maintaining a steady presence without falling into either complacency or humiliation. The goal is simple: regain autonomy, not impose control. I know you will love the video. By the end, you will know when to walk away, when to invest, and when to ignore. You will have proven that true superiority is not to dominate, but to need no one to submit to you. If you want real power, start by not giving away your judgment. To begin, let us talk about her most obvious Achilles heel: the need for constant validation. The attractive woman, although she seems unbreakable, lives trapped in a mirror that never finishes returning the certainty she seeks. No matter how perfect she appears to others, there is always an invisible crack that forces her to chase confirmation that she is still desired, that she is still the center. That validation, more than a luxury, is her oxygen, and here lies her fragility. Whoever controls the air she breathes controls her will. Physical attractiveness is not an immutable gift, but a debt to time. The woman who possesses it learns quickly that her beauty opens doors, bends wills, and awakens envy, but also that all that power depends on the echo of those around her. If that echo dies, if the looks stop sustaining her image, she feels she stops existing. This means that it does not matter how much she admires herself in the mirror. The final word on her value is never in her hands, but in the reaction of others. There is the chain that binds her. She does not feed on what she is, but on what others reflect back. Whoever wants to manipulate this point must understand that validation works like a pendulum. Each flattering word raises her, but it also makes her addicted to waiting for the next one. The clever manipulator does not waste that currency. He manages it like a tyrant who hands out bread to the hungry. He grants a calculated compliment, withdraws it, and watches how the attractive woman's mind begins to turn around him. It is not about drowning her in flowers, but about letting her feel the void between one caress and another. A silence that weighs more than any word. There, in that distance, dependence is born. Silence is a weapon more devastating than praise. When a man is not impressed by her beauty, she feels something break in the fabric of her identity. She is used to receiving attention automatically, as if it were a mandatory tribute. When someone dares to deny her that offering, it awakens an unbearable restlessness inside her. The absence of validation does not free her. It chains her. It forces her to prove, to insist, to seduce harder. Without realizing it, she becomes the hunter chasing the prey when it should be the other way around. Here lies the Machiavellian trap. Do not compete with those who flatter her. Differentiate yourself by denying what everyone else gives away. Excessive praise turns into noise, into meaninglessness. Strategic indifference, however, becomes a precise blow to her ego. She cannot stand being invisible because her entire life depends on being seen. When you withhold what she expects, she will be forced to seek in you the reflection that completes her. Not because she truly needs you, but because she cannot stand the idea that someone might escape the spell of her beauty. The man who controls validation controls the emotional rhythm of the attractive woman. When you give her approval, you hand her the drug that soothes her insecurities. When you take it away, you awaken her deepest anxiety. She will try to rationalize it, pretend it does not matter, but the truth is that her entire emotional system reorganizes itself to regain that small spark you once gave her. At that point, she is no longer free, because you decide when peace returns to her mind and when torment enters her chest. This dynamic is not obvious on the surface. The attractive woman usually presents herself as confident, proud, and dominant, but behind that mask is an emptiness she never manages to fill. She may have thousands of followers on social media, hundreds of admirers, a constant chorus of approval, and yet a single calculated silence is enough to destroy her apparent strength. That contrast is what makes her vulnerable. The larger the crowd that praises her, the more devastating becomes the silence of the one man who chooses not to. The strategist must remember that validation is a resource that loses value if given too freely. If you hand it out without measure, it loses all its power. The true art lies in managing the dose, giving just enough for her to feel you care, then withdrawing it so that it turns into a need. That fine balance creates an addiction stronger than any physical attraction. It is not her beauty she defends, it is the illusion of still being the center of someone's universe. And when you become that universe, her obsession becomes inevitable. In the end, constant validation is a bottomless pit that never fills. No compliment is enough, no gaze fully satisfies her. It is precisely that insatiability that allows the manipulator to take control. Because when someone has eternal hunger, the one who distributes the food becomes the absolute master. And so, the attractive woman who seems powerful because everyone desires her is revealed as the most fragile, because she desperately needs to be desired. Handling this truth with coldness means holding the switch to her mind. The attractive woman knows her greatest weapon is temporary, and that countdown makes her vulnerable. No other truth weighs as heavily on her mind as the certainty that her beauty, no matter how admired it is today, is destined to fade. She lives surrounded by compliments, but inside she hears a clock that never stops, an echo reminding her that every passing year steals a fragment of her power. That anxiety does not always show on her face, but it governs her choices, drives her insecurities, and forces her to seek desperately someone who can promise her what nature cannot: eternity. Youth is the most limited and cruelly managed resource. A powerful man can accumulate wealth, knowledge, and mastery over time. His value multiplies with experience, but the woman who builds her identity on beauty finds herself in a race whose finish line is her own destruction. That is why the more attractive she is, the more aware she becomes that her privilege has an expiration date. No mirror can silence that truth, nor any surgery bury forever the fear of becoming invisible. This vulnerability is not in future wrinkles, but in the constant worry that the world will stop revolving around her. The manipulator who understands this crack can exploit it with subtlety. It is not about insulting or attacking directly, because a frontal strike awakens resistance. True strategy is to hint gently at the fragility of her youth. A phrase like "beauty is fleeting," or a look that lingers a second longer than normal on a younger woman is enough to ignite insecurity in her mind. She, who can withstand the envy of others, cannot bear the idea that someone else might replace her on the pedestal. In that moment, her power becomes dependence, because she needs you to convince herself she still rules. This fear is not limited to the physical. It reaches the emotional plane as well. The attractive woman fears aging not only because she might lose the freshness of her body, but because she senses she will also lose the hold she has over men. She knows male desire often shifts to what is young, new, and fresh. That awareness makes her obsessed with the signals of her body: a wrinkle, the slightest sag, a change in the skin. Every detail is a reminder that time does not go backwards. That constant watch makes her a slave to what a clever man can turn into an instrument of power. If you make her believe that only with you she can still feel eternal, you will have bound her with invisible chains. The art of manipulation here is to offer an illusion that time refuses. You must not compete with her younger admirers or with those who give her cheap praise. Your role is different. Be the one who, with calculated coldness, gives the impression that her attractiveness transcends age, but always condition that validation on your presence. By giving her a spark of eternity, she will cling to you like someone clings to the last lamp in the dark. And the more she tries to keep that light, the more afraid she will be of losing you. Abandonment becomes her worst nightmare, because she knows that without you, the clock will sound cruelly again. The fear of aging also pits her against other women. Every young woman who appears around her becomes a living reminder of what she has lost or will soon lose. That tension becomes jealousy, silent rivalry, inevitable comparisons. If you learn to move those pieces skillfully, you can sow small doses of doubt that force her to fight to reaffirm her place. She who seemed confident and dominant begins to wear down in an invisible fight against time and against her own shadow. And you, who simply watch calmly, become the judge of her value. Here emerges the true fragility of the attractive woman. The more beautiful she is, the more she fears ceasing to be so. Ugliness does not destroy, because someone who was never admired does not fear losing what they never had. Beauty, on the other hand, is a cruel loan. While it lasts, it gives power. When it goes, it leaves a consuming void. That awareness beats in every thought of the attractive woman. Even on the days she smiles in front of everyone, she does not need you to remind her of her power. She needs you to hint at what nature will take away. That simple hint turns her confidence into anxiety, her pride into a disguised plea. The strategist knows that fear is not defeated, it is managed. Do not try to erase the idea that she will age, because that is impossible. Instead, give her an illusion of permanence that depends only on you. Make her feel that with you she can defy time, but never give her that security completely. If you do, you will lose control. Strength lies in keeping her in a constant ebb. One day, make her feel immortal. The next day, remind her lightly that everything is temporary. That unstable balance is the most effective prison, because she herself will seek the chains so as not to drown in despair. In conclusion, the hidden fear of aging is not a minor detail, but the foundation of the attractive woman's psyche. It is the shadow behind every smile, the anxiety behind every photo, the secret that governs her vanity. Whoever understands this weakness will hold the key to break her pride and shape her will, because beauty does not die suddenly, but slowly, like a candle burning down. And in that process, whoever masters the fear will also master the woman. Stay away from scammers. Now we talk about competition between women. An attractive woman cannot stand losing the spotlight to another who enters the room, because her whole existence rests on being the center of attention. From childhood, she was trained to live by comparison, to measure her worth by contrast with those around her, and to treat every social encounter as a stage where she must prove she is the lead. This rivalry is not a shallow whim, but a silent war that erupts inside her every time she senses someone else might outshine her. Competition among women is not limited to looks. It expands to recognition, male attention, and influence in any space they share. There, a fundamental weakness is revealed. The attractive woman does not compete because she wants to, she competes because she fears she will not be enough if someone else shines. That inability to tolerate being overshadowed makes her prey for a skilled manipulator. It is enough to hint at the existence of another figure who arouses admiration to ignite in her a fierce struggle. A casual comparison, an apparently innocent mention, even a glance diverted at the right moment. Those small acts will make her pride tremble. What others would consider trivial becomes, for her, an earthquake that threatens to topple the pedestal she stands on. There is the psychological crack to exploit. Sow doubt about her superiority and watch her wear herself down trying to reaffirm her dominance. Competition does not always show itself through direct attacks. On the contrary, the attractive woman often uses subtle strategies, looks heavy with contempt, comments disguised as politeness, or calculated silences aimed at reducing the rival. She watches every gesture and measures the strength of her presence by what she takes from others. That constant vigilance exhausts her because she not only fights to shine, she fears going out if someone else glows. And in that vigilance, the manipulator finds fertile ground. Just place two beauties in the same field and they will destroy each other while the observer collects the fruits. The man who understands this dynamic can use it with extraordinary efficiency. He does not need to openly declare in favor of another woman. It is enough to hint that there is someone else who attracts admiration. A single measured compliment toward a rival can open deep cracks in the attractive woman's security. Not because that rival is truly superior, but because the mere idea of losing the spotlight tortures her. Suddenly, she no longer fights against the man, but against a shadow that threatens to steal her stage, and in that fight, she desperately seeks to regain the attention of the one who had the power to divert his gaze. Competition between women is not a social accident, but a structural condition that supports beauty's value in the human hierarchy. If all were equally admired, attractiveness would lose its power as a currency. What makes an attractive woman valuable is precisely that others are pushed aside in her presence. She knows this. She has lived it every time a room stopped to look at her, and so she fears with such intensity the day that reaction ceases to be automatic. Whoever understands this dynamic will see that the attractive woman's fragility is not in losing her beauty, but in losing the monopoly of it. The real fear is not aging, but being replaced. The cold manipulator must learn to dose comparisons like a slow poison. If done directly and brutally, the woman will defend herself with pride. But if done delicately, with subtle irony or strategic silences, he will make her build her own insecurity. A single mention of another woman, younger, more elegant, or more interesting, even if false, awakens in her mind the obsession to prove the opposite. There lies the trap. Force her to compete for a place she already had. In trying to defend it, she wears herself down, exposes herself, and becomes predictable. Understand that this competition never truly ends. Even if she wins the momentary battle, the attractive woman continues to live under the threat of the next rival. Every room she enters can become an invisible battlefield where every woman present is a potential enemy. This keeps her in a perpetual state of alert, a condition a manipulator can either exacerbate or calm at will. Feed her the idea that others seek to take her place, and you become the only refuge where she feels safe. Withdraw that refuge, and you drown her in a sea of paranoia. Ultimately, competition between women reveals an unrelenting truth. The attractive woman is not free, she is a prisoner of her own power. What gives her an advantage is also what condemns her to fight endlessly, because she knows admiration is an unstable throne, and the higher that throne rises, the more she fears the fall. The strategist who understands this does not need to declare war. It is enough to ignite small flames of comparison and let her feed the fire herself. In the struggle to remain unique, every attractive woman reveals her greatest weakness, the inability to bear another taking her place. At this point, her obsession with image begins. She lives dependent on the mirror and social judgment, as if every glance were a court ruling on her value. It is not mere vanity, it is an entire system that defines who she is and how much she is worth by the reflection she receives. The attractive woman does not dress for herself, she dresses for the eye of others. She does not wear makeup for pleasure, but for necessity. She does not care for her body purely for health, but because she knows her power rests on maintaining the illusion of perfection. This obsession is her most intimate prison. Though she may appear confident, every doubtful gesture from others strikes her deeply. The tyranny of image is cruel because it never allows rest. Every day demands new confirmation. Every social encounter renews the silent test of others. Attractiveness is not inherited or stored like treasure. It is defended like a besieged fortress where any carelessness could mean defeat. She knows this, which is why she becomes a slave to endless rituals, checking her reflection, adjusting her clothes, correcting invisible details that in her mind become cracks capable of destroying her power. She lives chained to the illusion that she only exists if she appears perfect. And here is where a strategist can break her will. The manipulator does not need to attack her beauty directly, he only needs to plant doubt. An ambiguous comment, a light observation, or a gaze that lingers a little too long on a tiny flaw is enough to unleash a storm inside her. She, who can face open insults with pride, cannot escape the blade of suggestion. If someone she considers important leaves in the air the suspicion that her perfection is not absolute, her mind becomes trapped in a labyrinth with no exit. She will anxiously seek to regain that lost approval because her image is not just a resource, it is her entire identity. Society itself reinforces this obsession because the attractive woman has learned that approval opens doors closed to others. But that power depends on a silent pact with the crowd. She shines only while they confirm her. If external validation fades, her entire domain disappears. This game forces her to obsess over insignificant details, the angle of a photo, the lighting in a room, comparisons with others around her. Her mind never rests, for at every corner she may find a mirror that judges and condemns her. The art of exploiting this weakness lies not in rejecting her beauty, but in making it unstable. Make her believe something is missing, that a small detail escapes her control, that the perfection she guards so tightly is not as solid as she imagines. You do not need to be harsh. A light irony, a disguised remark, or even a strategic silence is enough for her to multiply doubts in her own mind. What to others would be a passing comment becomes for her a wound she must close at any cost, and in that attempt she gives her power to the one who had the skill to open the crack. Her obsession with image also reveals another uncomfortable truth. The attractive woman does not adorn herself to conquer the world, but to keep the attention of those she considers worthy. When someone important does not react to her efforts, she feels her entire effort was in vain. That is why the man who is not immediately impressed gains an unmatched advantage. He forces her to redouble her energy, to seek his approval harder, to become trapped in the game of regaining the gaze she has lost. At that moment, power no longer belongs to her reflection, but to the one who chooses to ignore it. The true prison of the attractive woman is that her image never fully belongs to her. She lives on what others see, and what others see is always fragile, shifting, and open to interpretation. That dependency exhausts her, because no matter how much she tries to project confidence, her mind works without rest to keep the illusion intact. And the one who understands this mechanism knows that it is not necessary to destroy the illusion, only to tilt it slightly, to darken it just enough so that she falls into the need to restore it. Her obsession is the rope that binds her, and the manipulator who knows how to tighten or loosen it becomes the master of her balance. In the end, her obsession with image is not a superficial detail. It is the core that sustains all her power. But what sustains her also traps her, because the mirror that seems like her ally is, in truth, her jailer. Each time she consults it, she surrenders a fragment of her freedom. Thus, the woman who seems confident, who seems dominant, is actually the most vulnerable. It only takes making her doubt her reflection for her world to tremble. And in that trembling, the one who controls the doubt becomes the true master. Now comes her next weakness, the addiction to male desire. She feeds on glances and gestures, like an animal that breathes through invisible recognition floating in the air. No matter how much she pretends independence, her vital energy depends on being observed, desired, and coveted. For the attractive woman, every glance is a confirmation of power, a reminder that she still reigns over others. But the same drug that lifts her also chains her, because she is never satisfied. The more she receives, the more she needs. When it fades, she collapses. The paradox is cruel. Her apparent strength, being desired, becomes her greatest weakness. What seems like dominance is actually dependence. Male desire is not just a compliment for her, it is the currency that sustains her entire kingdom. She lives surrounded by attention, smiles that appear easily, eyes that follow her shape, and that convinces her she controls the board. Yet behind that apparent advantage lies a corrosive truth. That power does not belong to her. It depends on the will of others. It is not she who holds it, but those who look at her, those who grant it. Deep down, she knows this, and that is why she fears losing it. That is why she works so hard to keep it alive, even if the effort turns her into a slave to the men she believes she dominates. The withdrawal from that drug is devastating. If a man decides not to look at her, if the flow of attention suddenly stops, the attractive woman feels an unbearable emptiness. Not because she has stopped being beautiful, but because her mind is trained to measure her worth by the reactions of others. A silence of desire is, for her, louder than any rejection. And in that void, her behavior changes. She becomes anxious, she provokes, she gives more, she does everything possible to reignite the spark. That transformation reveals her fragility, because the man who can contain the desire she expects forces her to beg for what she once received effortlessly. Here lies the Machiavellian opportunity. While most men melt under her beauty, the strategist who controls himself gains invisible superiority. He does not need to insult or despise her. He only needs to deny what everyone else gives her. Calculated indifference becomes a weapon more lethal than open admiration. By denying her the drug of desire, you awaken in her a hunger she does not know how to satisfy. And that hunger forces her to chase you, to seek what she thought was guaranteed, until her pride bends. The queen becomes the prey, begging to feel adored once more. Male desire is also her prison because she cannot renounce it. She may disguise that dependency behind speeches of autonomy, but in truth, she defines herself through the attention she generates. No matter how many achievements she gathers in other areas, if men stop looking at her as before, she feels her essence fading. That obsession makes her manipulable, because the man who controls the switch of her desire controls the rhythm of her existence. It is not about dominating her body, It is about mastering the source of validation that sustains her mind. This psychological poison becomes clearer with time. As the attractive woman senses her power of seduction weakening, she clings desperately to those who still make her feel desired. There, the manipulator has complete advantage. If he knows how to ration his attention, he can become her only supplier of that emotional drug. A calculated look, a brief gesture of interest followed by cold distance, a game of giving and taking. These are enough to make her will bend to yours. She will seek to regain what she lost, and in that effort, she will give you more and more control. The common man becomes a slave to beauty because he does not know how to resist it. The cunning man turns beauty into a slave of his indifference. The difference is not in her attractiveness, but in the strength of the one who decides not to give his validation automatically. Their true superiority is built, not in falling to the temptation of her charm, but in observing it without bowing, in recognizing her power without offering tribute. The attractive woman becomes confused, intrigued, obsessed with the one who does not fall under the spell that is irresistible to everyone else. Ultimately, addiction to male desire exposes the great contradiction of the attractive woman. She believes she rules because everyone looks at her, but in reality, she is ruled because she needs those looks to exist. She is prisoner of her own power, and the more she displays it, the more vulnerable she becomes to someone who understands the mechanism. The manipulator who understands this weakness does not need to shout or dominate. He only needs to control the dose of desire he supplies. In that management lies the key to her mind, because the day she lacks what she needs most, she will be the one crawling to recover it. An extreme technique in psychopathy used to erase identity and completely subdue a person. A method so dark, it borders on illegal. Politicians, bosses, partners, salespeople, everyone manipulates. Here, the slavery of the ego emerges. The attractive woman builds her identity on admiration like a temple raised on unstable ground. Her beauty is not just an attribute, it is the foundation of a self that depends on external applause to stand. Without that validation, the whole structure begins to wobble. That is why the ego becomes her prison. Everything she does, says, or projects revolves around keeping intact the image of greatness she has constructed. It does not matter that she appears confident, because deep down she knows her value is tied to her ability to provoke fascination. And anything that depends on another's gaze is never absolute power, but disguised slavery. This inflated ego is not a luxury, it is armor she forced herself to wear to survive in a world that rewards being desired. But the brighter that armor shines, the heavier it becomes. Every gesture of indifference toward her attractiveness hits her like a betrayal. Every comment that does not confirm her superiority turns into a thorn that forces her to react. Here lies the Machiavellian opportunity. The man who knows how to touch that ego with subtle irony, with ambiguous remarks that do not destroy but unsettle, drags her into a game where she must prove herself. And whoever must prove is already at a disadvantage because he chose the field. The ego enslaves because it turns the attractive woman into a puppet of her own appearance. She cannot show weakness, she cannot accept being eclipsed, she cannot cede ground. Every forced smile, every calculated posture, every phrase she utters is designed to reinforce the illusion of superiority. But behind that effort beats an unadmitted fear. The fear of being discovered as ordinary, of being nothing more than one among many. That anguish makes her predictable, because the manipulator who plants doubt strikes at the very base of her identity, a suggestion that her beauty is not enough or that there is a limit she will never reach. It opens a crack that bleeds her pride. This is where fine irony becomes a whip. It is not about insulting or humiliating her, but about sliding in comments that gently erode her pedestal. A light laugh at her vanity, a veiled comparison that forces her to question herself, a calm gesture where she expected to dazzle. That coldness disarms her because it confronts her with the possibility that not everyone falls under the weight of her ego. Then the need to prove becomes irresistible, and each attempt she makes to prove it reinforces your dominance over her. She is not the one imposing, she becomes the one chasing your approval. The ego is also a slow poison because it never fills. No matter how much she is admired, there will always be a sliver of doubt that must be filled. She lives on what others see, and what others see is always fragile and changeable. That dependency wears her down, because even while she projects security, her mind never stops working to preserve the illusion. Whoever understands this mechanism knows that there is no need to destroy the illusion. Tilt it, darken it slightly, and she will sink into the urgency to restore it. Her obsession is the rope that binds her. The manipulator who can tighten or loosen it becomes the owner of her balance. That insatiability is the chain that binds her. You can give her a calculated compliment so she feels elevated, and then withdraw it so she collapses into the need to seek more. You can give her the illusion of power and then deny her confirmation so she weakens. In that alternation of giving and taking lies the true strategist's technique, turning the ego that seems like strength into the rope she ties around herself. The slavery of ego also turns her against herself. The more admiration she receives, the more she fears losing it. She lives trapped in contradiction. She needs the gaze of others, yet that need exposes her to vulnerability. She cannot escape the cycle, because abandoning the ego would mean destroying the foundation upon which she built her life. The manipulator, however, only needs to understand that behind every proud gesture hides a silent plea. Tell me I am still special. When you decide not to grant her that confirmation, she bends on her own, trying to draw it from you. Ultimately, the slavery of the ego is not just a flaw, it is her sentence. The ego demands constant nourishment and never grants rest. What makes her great is also what makes her fragile. And the man who understands this holds a silent but devastating weapon, the ability to turn her pride into weakness, her vanity into a trap, her identity into a chain. Thus, the woman who seemed untouchable becomes prisoner to her own need to prove to you what, deep down, she no longer fully believes herself. Now appears the hidden emotional dependence. She pretends independence, but deeply longs to be controlled by someone stronger. That is the paradox of the attractive woman. She presents herself as self-sufficient, proud of her freedom and her ability to need no one. Yet in her deepest self, she craves a power that can dominate her and free her from the burden of always having to decide for herself. That contradiction makes her fertile ground for the strategist who understands that the mask of independence is nothing but a disguise hiding emptiness. Behind every proud gesture, behind every confident word, beats the desire for someone to impose direction, to draw boundaries, to bind her invisibly to a will stronger than her own. The attractive woman has lived surrounded by flatterers who bow to her charm, men who confuse her with an altar and crawl in exchange for crumbs. That experience tires her, drains her, because she knows there is no power in dominating someone who is already surrendered. That is why, when she meets a man who does not bend, who does not fall under the spell of her apparent autonomy, something inside her breaks. What others would interpret as rejection, she experiences as an irresistible challenge, proof that there exists a force capable of containing her, guiding her, mastering her without words. And that recognition is both what she fears most and what she desires most. Her camouflage of independence is a defensive strategy, a shield that lets her appear as if she needs no one. But that shield becomes a prison, forcing her to keep playing a role that never truly satisfies her. She wants to feel free, yet her freedom turns into emptiness. She wants to feel admired, but constant admiration bores her. She wants to feel that she decides, but deep down, she longs for someone to decide for her, someone whose will takes away the burden of control. That is her weakness. While she pretends to be untouchable, she is secretly waiting to be reached by a steady hand that does not tremble. The manipulator who understands this does not rush to give her what she asks for aloud, but instead offers what her soul quietly begs for. It is not about shouting authority, but embodying a stable coldness that never needs to assert itself with words. It is in silence, in simple orders, in decisions made without asking, that she discovers the weight of a greater will. And that experience draws her in like a magnet, because she finally finds someone capable of containing what others cannot touch. Within that containment, admiration is born, and from admiration, dependence grows. This dependence is the most dangerous kind because she does not recognize it. She may even swear she remains free, that she is with someone by choice and not by need, but the truth is, her mind begins to revolve around the one who dominates her with calm control. Her actions adjust, her emotions align, and her small rebellions become a game, a test to see if that strength she admires truly exists. And every time she feels that dominance, her attachment deepens. She convinces herself that without that firm presence, her life would lose its structure, like a river overflowing without a channel. Here lies the Machiavellian key. Never argue with her apparent independence. Let her proclaim her freedom, but remind her through your actions that true safety exists only under your control. You do not need to shout it or enforce it through brutality. It is enough to maintain consistent coldness, a calm that she cannot break. That contrast between her supposed autonomy and your real dominance drags her into an invisible trap. She admires your strength while depending on it to keep her world together. In the end, the emotional dependence hidden behind the attractive woman's mask proves that her independence is only a facade. What she truly desires is not freedom, but the power to surrender, safely, to someone who does not bow before her charms. And that is where the manipulator finds his victory. By refusing to yield, he forces her to surrender. By showing strength, he draws her to seek protection in the coldness that both frightens and fascinates her. And when that process completes, the woman who once seemed indomitable ends up bound by her own will, a loyal follower of the very power she once swore she would never need. Her attractiveness draws people in, but it also leaves her paranoid about losing what she has conquered. The attractive woman lives with the awareness that her power does not lie only in conquest, but in retention, in keeping what others can only momentarily win. To be desired, to be chosen, to be the center. For her, that is only the beginning of a constant anxiety. The suspicion that one day that attention may fade, that someone could walk away without looking back. That is why her apparent confidence always carries a hidden tension, a quiet fear of being stripped of the throne she works so hard to hold. This weakness does not always show in public, but it follows her like a scar. In every relationship, every bond, every space where she senses that the other person could walk away. The fear of abandonment is the direct consequence of having lived off the attention of others. Just as an addict fears losing access to the substance that sustains him, the attractive woman fears being left alone, without eyes to confirm her, without words to lift her. She may pretend indifference, she may disguise attachment with pride, but deep down every absence feels like a sentence. She knows that attracting attention is easy, keeping it is the real challenge. That uncertainty weakens her, because instead of living in peace with what she has, she lives in anticipation of losing what has not yet happened. The paranoia of being replaced follows her even when she appears most confident. The clever manipulator understands that this fear does not need to be spoken aloud to control her behavior. It is enough to hint at the possibility of absence for her to become more docile, more pliable, more willing to yield. A short delay in responding, a calculated withdrawal, a brief but clear distance, these are enough to trigger the alarm in her mind. What for others might be simple indifference becomes, for her, an inner storm. She imagines loss, invents betrayal, feeds her anxiety with the thought that she could be abandoned. And in that process, she clings even harder to the one who caused her fear, because she prefers uncertainty over the confirmation of emptiness. Abandonment as a threat is more powerful than any insult. If you insult her, she can fight back. If you compare her, she can resist. But if you show her the shadow of your absence, if you make her feel you can leave at any moment, you dismantle her entire structure of pride. Her vanity has no defense against silence. This is where a strategist must act with precision, not through brutal rejection, which only provokes rage, but through elegant withdrawal. A silence that weighs, a calm that suggests your world does not depend on her. That contrast wounds her deeper than any word, because it confronts her with the one truth she cannot escape, that she does not control you. This fear forces her into contradiction. She can act proud, demanding, even cruel, but at the smallest sign of abandonment, her attitude changes. The woman who once seemed untouchable softens, lowers her guard, and tries to hold on to what she fears losing. It is in that moment that her true vulnerability is exposed. It is not your love she fears losing, it is your presence. That fear makes her capable of negotiating, yielding privileges, or accepting conditions she would otherwise reject. In her value system, it is better to submit to the will of someone who could leave than to face the abyss of being alone. This fear also explains why the attractive woman often stays in relationships where she endures far more than she appears willing to tolerate. Though her public image may suggest she would never accept less than she deserves, in private, the threat of losing the other turns her into a captive. She would rather hold on to a flawed bond than face complete solitude. The manipulator who understands this knows he does not need to offer perfection. He only needs to suggest departure. That suggestion weighs more than any gesture of affection because it awakens the wound that rules her mind. In the end, the fear of abandonment turns the attractive woman into a prisoner of her own power. The same beauty that draws crowds becomes her curse, because it reminds her that what overflows today may vanish tomorrow. Every time someone leaves, she relives her deepest fear. That admiration fades, desire dies, and solitude waits patiently in the dark. The man who learns to manipulate this fear does not need visible chains to dominate her. His weapon is absence. His strategy is withdrawal. His power is silence. Because when she believes she might lose you, she no longer thinks about how to control you. She thinks only about how to keep you from leaving. Sex is her kingdom of power, but also her prison. The attractive woman learned early that her physical allure can open doors, that her sensuality is a weapon capable of bending wills, that her presence alone can tilt the balance in her favor. Yet within that apparent strength lies an invisible shackle. The more she uses pleasure as a tool of dominance, the more she depends on that pleasure being recognized, desired, and celebrated. What seems like her instrument of power becomes the chain that ties her identity to something she cannot fully control. Because when someone refuses to surrender to her erotic charm, she instantly discovers the fragility behind the mask. Sex is not only the field where she reigns, it is also the mirror in which she measures herself. Each conquest is a confirmation. Each surrender is a victory that feeds her ego. But the same dynamic that seems to elevate her turns her into a prisoner of her own game. She convinces herself that only through desire can she remain at the center, and fears that without it, she will fade into irrelevance. That is why she guards her body like a temple and turns intimacy into a stage where she must prove that she is still invincible. Yet deep down, she knows it will not always be that way, and that awareness makes her a hostage to fear. Fear of no longer awakening the same fire. Fear of not being enough. Fear that the pleasure she offers will lose its value. The manipulator understands that the key lies in reversing this balance. He does not need to reject her outright or despise her sensuality. He only needs to treat it as a scarce resource. If you control access to pleasure and transform it into a conditional reward, the dynamic flips. She stops using sex as a weapon and begins to experience it as a prize that depends on you. A gesture of coldness in the moment she expected passion, a silence that replaces desire, a calculated withdrawal of physical attention. These are enough to send her mind into anxiety. That anxiety is proof that pleasure, instead of empowering her, enslaves her. And when you control the key to that enslavement, you dominate not only her body, but her entire psyche. Pleasure by nature is fleeting. No experience lasts forever. No physical sensation can be sustained eternally. But the attractive woman, having built her worth on this field, is forced to chase that moment again and again. That pursuit exhausts her and makes her dependent. Each encounter that does not meet her expectations feels like a personal failure. Every hint of indifference feels like defeat. Here lies the strategist's opportunity, not to grant her the constant certainty of triumph, but to introduce doubt, the subtle sense that what she believes she controls is never fully guaranteed. In that uncertainty, her apparent power turns into pleading. Her strongest weapon becomes her Achilles heel. The ego of the attractive woman cannot bear being deprived of pleasure as a form of validation. If she senses she cannot seduce you, if she suspects she no longer holds power over your desire, obsession ignites. She will do everything to recover that control. She will double her efforts, become more intense, more giving, more insistent. But that intensity is not victory, it is surrender, because she no longer acts from dominance, but from need. Whoever brings her to that point has already reversed the game. The woman who believed she controlled male desire becomes the slave of her own desperate search to reclaim it. The weakness of pleasure also reveals itself in her inability to separate sex from her self-esteem. A single word, a hint of coldness, a silence after intimacy, all are enough to unleash a storm of insecurities within her. She will ask herself if she failed, if she stopped being enough, if her beauty was not enough to sustain the flame. And in those questions, the true center of her fragility is revealed. She needs pleasure to confirm what she cannot assure herself. That emotional and psychological dependence is the crack that allows the manipulator to enter and shape her behavior to his advantage. In the end, sex is both her strength and her ruin. The attractive woman may believe she reigns supreme in that territory, that there she holds absolute power. But the truth is that the more she uses it as a weapon, the more she becomes trapped in the need for validation it demands. The manipulator who understands this paradox knows he does not need to compete with her power. He only needs to control it. To turn pleasure into a resource that is managed, into a currency she must earn, is to take the throne she believes she rules. Because when she realizes she can no longer bend your will with what has always worked for her, she breaks. And in that break, in the clash between her illusion of control and the reality of your dominance, true victory is born. To hold in your hands not only her body, but also her mind and her pride. Now we come to the next point, the need to admire. No matter how desired she is, she still seeks a man who does not tremble before her. This point reveals a paradox few understand. The attractive woman, accustomed to dominating through beauty and watching others bow at her feet, eventually grows tired of that constant submission. Her life is filled with people who praise her, validate her, and surrender to her aesthetic power. And while that dynamic feeds her ego, it also condemns her to unbearable emptiness. Because true desire does not come from immediate surrender, it comes from confrontation with something greater than herself. That is why, deep down, the attractive woman longs to meet a man whose will is stronger than hers, someone who does not tremble under her charm or lose composure under her games. This need to admire is her silent confession of dependence. While she appears to seek praise and adoration, what she truly longs for is to surrender to a man whose character dominates her without trying. The power she holds over ordinary men loses all value once she realizes they all behave the same. They flatter, they please, they yield. That is where the manipulator stands apart. He does not compete in beauty or try to dazzle her with superficial gestures. He only needs to demonstrate that his spirit is unshakable, that his will does not break, that his center remains intact, even before the woman others consider irresistible. That kind of resistance is the mirror she both fears and craves, because it reminds her that she is not all-powerful, that there exists a force to which she can surrender without shame. When an attractive woman perceives that strength, her entire demeanor changes. The pride she once used as a weapon turns into silent admiration. She begins to study every move you make, to question what makes you different from other men who fall so easily. That curiosity ignites her, because it puts her in unfamiliar territory, insecurity. She who was always the examiner now becomes the examined. The manipulator who understands this dynamic must remain cold. He must not fall into the temptation of showing excessive interest. He must allow her to come closer, drawn by the mystery she cannot decode. Each firm silence, each gaze that does not melt, each response that refuses to please, these are direct strikes against her need to admire. The danger for most men is the desire to impress her, to compete with her ego. That path leads only to defeat. What truly subdues her is the opposite: steady indifference, natural authority, and the quiet confidence of a man who does not need her beauty to define his worth. There, respect begins, because she recognizes a force she cannot easily manipulate, and that force opens the door to surrender. When she realizes that her usual weapons no longer work, fascination takes hold. The man who resists what others desire becomes an object of higher desire himself, precisely because he is not trapped in the herd. The need to admire, then, is not a whim. It is a vital necessity. An attractive woman who never finds someone stronger than herself eventually grows to despise all her admirers. She sees most men as toys, servants, replaceable pieces on a boring chessboard. Only the man who shows greater dominance breaks that monotony, awakening in her the instinct to surrender. That is why the manipulator who understands this weakness never tries to prove his worth with words, but with presence. His calm alone, in the face of her storm of seduction, is enough to bend her pride and make her lower her guard. It is crucial to understand that this surrender does not come from innocent affection, but from fascination with what cannot be broken. The attractive woman does not submit to just anyone, only to the one who forces her to recognize a superior strength. And in that recognition, she loses the illusion of control. She begins to seek his approval, to compete for his attention, to doubt herself in the very arena where she once believed she was invincible. That transformation is the proof of her enslavement. Her need to admire becomes the leash by which the unshakable man leads her. What once appeared to be her supreme power now exposes her deepest void. Ultimately, the need to admire turns the attractive woman into a prisoner of the man with a stronger will than hers, because she, the one who seemed invulnerable, cannot bear the indifference of the strong. And the more she tries to impress him, the deeper she surrenders to the idea that she has finally found a power worthy of submission. The manipulator who remains unmoved not only conquers her attention, he conquers her respect. And the respect of an attractive woman is the most reliable path to domination. There, at the point where her pride bows voluntarily, lies the final victory, making her own arrogance kneel before your strength. Now we see her next weakness, insecurity. Disguised as arrogance. The more arrogant she appears, the more fear she hides. The attractive woman who displays superiority, who pretends to be untouchable, who flaunts indifference, is nothing more than a fragile statue held up by invisible threads of insecurity. Arrogance is her most effective mask, and her most fragile one. Because anyone who constantly needs to affirm superiority is, deep down, terrified of being unmasked. That fear pulses beneath every exaggerated gesture, every sharp word, every gaze meant to dominate. What appears as power is merely a wall built to hide the cracks within, cracks only an attentive eye can see. Insecurity disguised as arrogance is one of the easiest weaknesses to exploit, because she herself cannot escape it. She presents herself as confident, but desperately seeks confirmation. She shows pride, but cannot endure indifference. She pretends to be independent, but secretly begs for validation. This contradiction makes her vulnerable. Every time someone ignores her arrogance or faces it calmly, her mask begins to tremble. And when that mask starts to crack, she reveals what she never wants anyone to see: fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of losing. Fear of being forgotten. The manipulator who understands this weakness never argues with arrogance directly, for those who fight pride only feed it. The true strategy is to recognize the mask and speak to the fear behind it. Not with shouting or insults, but with measured insinuations, heavy silences, and subtle gestures that remind her she is not in control. When you do this, the arrogant becomes fragile because she must choose: keep the mask or chase the one who questions it. And in that choice, she inevitably exposes her insecurity. The most fascinating part of this disguise is that the bigger the arrogance, the deeper the wound it hides. A woman who boasts of being untouchable does so because she fears being hurt. One who claims to have every man at her feet says it because she cannot stand the thought that someone might not want her. And the one who seems to despise others does so to protect herself from the rejection she secretly fears. Thus, her pride is not a shield, it is an unintentional confession. And the strategist knows how to read that confession like a map leading directly to her fragility. The Machiavellian art lies in turning the mask against its wearer. If she boasts too much, remain indifferent. If she raises herself too high, let her echo fade into silence. If she tries to assert superiority, do not react. Because the absence of response is the most devastating blow to an ego that lives on constant confirmation. Slowly, her arrogance turns into a weapon against herself. It drains her, exposes her, and forces her to chase even harder what is being denied to her. What once seemed like unshakable pride turns into anxiety, and in that anxiety, she reveals the insecurity she tried to hide. Arrogance is nothing more than a carefully built disguise for emotional fragility, and that fragility reveals itself in how she reacts the moment she loses control. An attractive woman can tolerate excessive compliments, even open insults, but she cannot endure indifference or the subtle doubt cast upon her image. That emptiness tortures her because it forces her to face the possibility that her power is not absolute. The manipulator who understands this truth does not need violence or confrontation, only self-control. Calm hurts more than attack because it deprives her of the one thing she feeds on, your reaction. In the end, insecurity disguised as arrogance turns the attractive woman into a prisoner of herself. The prouder she appears, the more dependent she becomes. And the one who pierces that mask, not with aggression, but with an unshakable coldness she cannot manipulate, holds total control. Because what she fears most is not losing the men who submit, but losing the respect of the one man who does not. And when that happens, when her arrogance can no longer sustain the mask, she is exposed, vulnerable, broken, desperate to recover what she lost. At that moment, the power no longer belongs to her, but to the one who made her reveal her true face. Now we arrive at weakness 13, emotional fragility. A single word from you, spoken with precision, can drag her into emotional dependence. Beauty does not shield her from psychological venom. It makes her more vulnerable because she lives in a constant state of exposure. The attractive woman is used to dominating with her presence, to bending wills with a smile, to controlling the room with a simple gesture. Yet behind that apparent power lies an extreme sensitivity few ever notice. The ease with which she collapses when someone touches her emotional strings with intention. This fragility does not come from a lack of self-esteem, but from her dependence on external validation. Because whoever builds herself through the eyes of others is doomed to fall by their judgment. What strengthens her in the eyes of the world is also what makes her prey. She may receive daily praise, may hear endless words of admiration, but a single ironic remark, a veiled criticism, or a cold silence is enough to sink her into doubt. Her world, built on admiration, trembles faster than she dares to admit. The manipulator understands that in this territory, no shouting is needed. You do not insult, you whisper. A brief phrase, dropped at the perfect moment, can wound her confidence more than 1,000 open attacks. And the more she tries to hide the wound, the more visible her need becomes to repair what you shattered with a single insinuation. The emotional fragility of the attractive woman reveals itself in her inability to handle uncertainty. She is used to controlling others' reactions through her appearance, and when someone breaks that pattern, her mind ignites into chaos. If you make her doubt her allure, if you do not respond like the others, if you plant even a shadow of indifference, she will immediately try to win back your approval. That urgency exposes her. What once looked like arrogance turns into a hidden plea. What once seemed like superiority becomes anxiety. And there, in that shift, her greatest weakness is revealed. The emotional dependence she can never admit publicly. The ordinary man reacts to her beauty with instant surrender. He becomes a slave to her charm. But the strategist, the one who understands her fragility, never surrenders completely. He measures the weight of his words, releasing them like a slow poison, not to kill, but to weaken. Calculated indifference, a pause in conversation, an ambiguous remark, these are enough to trap her in the labyrinth of her own insecurity. While she exhausts herself trying to recover the certainty that she still holds power, you already have her trapped in the web of doubt you quietly planted. Silence, when used with intention, is far more destructive than any outburst. This fragility does not fade with time, it intensifies. The longer she has ruled through her attractiveness, the harder it becomes for her to accept the idea of losing it. So when someone destabilizes her with a cold gesture, the impact cuts twice. She not only faces doubt in the present, but also the fear that this emptiness is a glimpse of what's to come. At that point, the attractive woman is no longer fighting a man. She's fighting the ghost of her own decline. And that inner war is the perfect ground for a manipulator to control her emotions with invisible strings. But the mistake would be to confuse fragility with complete weakness. She doesn't collapse easily before everyone. She knows how to wear the mask, how to act untouched, how to smile through attention. Yet the one who reaches her emotional core discovers a dependent, anxious, fearful mind hiding behind the polished exterior. The secret lies in patience, in planting doubt, stepping back in silence, and letting her exhaust herself trying to keep her mask intact. The more she tries to appear strong, the more drained she becomes in Psyche, and the greater her craving for validation from the one who shook her balance. In the end, emotional fragility makes the attractive woman a slave to whoever controls her anxiety, because it isn't beauty that sustains her, It's recognition. When someone interrupts that stream of validation, when someone denies her reflection, she becomes an open field for psychological manipulation. Just one precise word, one cold gesture, or one prolonged silence is enough to turn her pride into need. And in that moment, when the supposedly invulnerable woman reveals her dependence, the power shifts. She no longer holds it. The one who spoke little, doubted much, and dominated without visible effort now does. Now we reach weakness 14, vanity in social media. Her beauty now lives and dies on the screen. The attractive woman of today no longer relies only on the mirror or the physical gaze of those around her. She also needs the digital confirmation of her power. Social media has become her altar, the sacred space where she receives worship in the form of likes, comments, and followers. But that need is not a superficial whim. It's a psychological dependency that defines her self-esteem. Every post is a public exam. Every reaction is a verdict. Every silence online is a direct wound to her pride. She may appear in full control, confident, flawless, adored. But in truth, she lives chained to the invisible approval of a faceless crowd. Her vanity on social media isn't mere exhibition, it's survival. What she calls self-expression is often self-measurement. She counts validation like oxygen, convincing herself that the attention she receives equals worth. And yet, the irony is brutal. The more she shares, the more she exposes the emptiness she's trying to hide. Behind every seductive photo lies the silent question she can't stop asking: do I still matter? The manipulator who understands this weakness doesn't need to engage directly. He doesn't need to criticize or withdraw entirely. He simply withholds digital attention, the modern form of presence. A single unread message, a seen but unanswered reply, or the absence of a like can unsettle her far more than any spoken rejection. Because for her, validation is no longer just emotional. It's algorithmic. It's a public scoreboard of power, beauty, and relevance. And every gap, every pause, every unreturned gesture creates a tremor in her carefully curated world. Her online vanity is her mirror, but it's also her leash. Because the one who controls the rhythm of attention controls her sense of self. And when she begins refreshing her screen for you, when her dopamine depends on your silence, that's when you've already won. It is a system of endless validation that slowly consumes her. Behind every carefully posed photo, every rehearsed angle, every spontaneous caption, there hides a constant anxiety, the fear of not being confirmed, of not receiving the echo she expected. That anxiety is her weakness because it turns her into a slave of what she shows, not what she is. The attractive woman who builds her digital identity becomes trapped in a never-ending cycle. She posts to get approval, receives approval to feel alive, yet never feels full. She always needs more. She always fears that next time it will not come. She always suspects that a rival might surpass her. The manipulator who understands this dependence knows the goal is not to compete with her online, but to intervene in her relationship with that world. You do not need to expose or humiliate her publicly. All you must do is control her access to validation. A calculated comment on something she posts, a silence where she expected your reaction, a subtle gesture of disapproval that contradicts the chorus of digital praise. These can destabilize her more than any open criticism ever could. She can ignore 1,000 fake compliments, but she cannot ignore the indifference of the one whose gaze she values above the crowd. That is the crack in her armor. While the world tells her she is perfect, your silence weighs heavier than all their voices combined. Digital vanity also makes her predictable. Every post is a coded message. Every photo is a disguised cry for confirmation. The one who learns to read between the lines can decode which insecurity she is trying to hide. If she exaggerates her sensuality, she fears losing her appeal. If she flaunts independence, she fears being seen as weak. If she displays her social life, she fears being forgotten. Each public gesture is an intimate confession offered freely to the observant eye, and the manipulator, who refuses to be blinded by the surface, can use that information to control her privately. Her most visible fragility is this: what she shows the world rarely matches what she feels in private. She can collect thousands of digital reactions, but one man's silence can shatter her entire illusion. That contrast eats away at her. What good are all these followers if he doesn't react? There lies the strategist's true power, to become that selective void that weighs more than all the multitudes. By refusing to give what everyone else freely offers, your indifference becomes a weapon. Your gaze becomes the supreme judge of her vanity. Her online vanity also magnifies her fear of replacement. Every day brings new faces, younger, bolder, more daring, threatening to take the spotlight she believes is hers. That digital competition never sleeps, and she knows it. So she spends hours editing, polishing, perfecting every detail, as if her very life depended on that perfection. But the true power is not found in joining her digital war. It lies in making her feel that all her online perfection means nothing if she cannot conquer you in reality. When you remind her that no filter replaces presence, when you subtly suggest that what she shows on screen is just a shadow, you awaken her deepest wound, the fear of not being enough. Ultimately, vanity on social media turns the attractive woman into a puppet of the collective gaze. She lives to be seen, but that gaze is never enough. And the more she exposes herself, the emptier she becomes. The manipulator who masters this weakness never needs to shout or compete. He only needs to govern his silence and measure his attention with cold precision. Because in a world where everyone bows before her, the true master will always be the one who dares to withhold the validation everyone else gives away without restraint. There, in that silent contrast, the attractive woman becomes trapped, not dependent on the world that worships her, but on the one man who refuses to bow to her vanity. Now we uncover one of her deepest, most dangerous weaknesses, the fantasy of submission. Though she will never admit it aloud, many beautiful women secretly crave to be dominated by someone stronger than themselves. If you can embody that role, you become both the poison and the cure. The attractive woman, accustomed to endless admiration, lives surrounded by men willing to kneel before her beauty. Men who obey her whims, revolve their worlds around her validation, and gladly trade their pride for a moment of her attention. This position of privilege intoxicates her, but it also exhausts her. Because absolute power, when it meets no resistance, eventually loses its thrill. The paradox is simple. The more obedience she receives, the stronger her longing becomes to meet someone who resists her, someone who doesn't tremble, someone who can bend what everyone else feeds. From that longing is born the fantasy of submission, a secret fire she will never confess in public. Submission here does not mean physical enslavement. It means the surrender of emotional control to someone whose strength feels undeniable, a man who stands unshaken, self-contained, and immune to her charm. The attractive woman knows she can manipulate ordinary men with a smile, a hint of indifference, or a false rejection. But when she meets someone who doesn't break, who doesn't rush to please her, who answers her tests with calm and quiet dominance, something inside her shifts. That resistance awakens her desire to yield, not out of weakness, but out of awe. It is the recognition of true power, a power she cannot fake, a power she secretly yearns for. This realization excites her because for once she meets someone she cannot control. She starts to admire the very man who doesn't fall, and that admiration becomes dependence. The manipulator who understands this never kneels. He stays firm, master of himself, unbothered by her provocations. Each time she tries to dominate and meets a wall of indifference, her pride cracks and her attraction deepens. She will never say it, but she feels it with every breath. That magnetic pull toward a man whose silence has more weight than her beauty. This mix of strength and resistance makes her fantasize about surrender. Not to be humiliated, but to be disarmed by certainty, to finally rest under the will of someone she can trust to lead. The fantasy of being dominated is born from exhaustion. A woman constantly placed on a pedestal eventually grows tired of carrying her own crown. She secretly longs for someone who will lift that weight from her shoulders, someone who will free her from the constant demand of being the center of attention. The domination she craves is not abuse, it is structure, the sense of safety in giving up control without losing worth. Yet this desire lives in paradox. The more she denies it, the stronger it becomes, and the manipulator who perceives it can exploit it with patience. He builds a dynamic where she asks for what she once would have resisted. True power emerges when the attractive woman begins to trust that the one who confronts her is stronger than her impulses. At that moment, the fantasy of submission becomes real. The woman who once seemed untouchable now seeks the opposite role, not queen, but servant to the will of the one who proved her beauty is not enough. And this transformation does not require force or cruelty. It is built through strategy, through unbreakable calm, through quiet certainty, through the unwavering message that your world does not orbit hers. That cold composure dismantles her illusion of control and awakens her desire to surrender. But this fantasy is dangerous for those who don't understand it. If the manipulator lets himself be seduced by her submission, if he confuses her surrender with worship, the game is lost. She will regain control and the spell will break. The real power lies in maintaining the balance, accepting her surrender without giving away your authority, receiving her submission without becoming her captive. Because her desire to be dominated is, deep down, just another form of control. Only the man who keeps his distance, who stays steady and self-governed, can turn that fantasy into a prison she walks into willingly, forever dependent on the one who embodies the power she craves but can never possess. In the end, the fantasy of submission is not a random whim. It is the silent confession that the attractive woman is not as powerful as she seems. Her beauty can command multitudes, but her heart still trembles with the fear that she will never meet a man strong enough to master her. And when that man appears, not as a tyrant, but as a cold, composed strategist, she realizes her game is over. What was arrogance becomes surrender, what was power becomes dependence, and what once was a desire to be adored turns into a hunger to be governed. At that moment, the manipulator no longer needs to fight, because she, guided by her own fantasy, walks willingly into the trap of the submission she once swore to deny. Now we uncover her greatest weakness, the need to feel unique. When you make her doubt that she is, she will desperately try to prove you wrong. And in that struggle, you already own her. The attractive woman lives surrounded by admirers, men who flatter her, rivals who envy her, and eyes that consume her as if she were a rare object. That flood of attention should bring her peace, but it poisons her instead, because what she receives is repetitive, hollow, superficial. What she truly craves is not to be seen by many, but to be perceived differently by one. Being beautiful is not enough. She needs to feel irreplaceable. She needs to believe that among all women she is the chosen one. And when that illusion wavers, her entire world collapses. The irony is cruel. Her supposed confidence is built on that very emptiness. She shows pride, parades her independence, and insists she needs no one. Yet in silence, she begs for a kind of validation that cannot be bought with crowds. She longs for a gaze that sees her as incomparable, a word that suggests she holds a value that cannot be copied. That is her most dangerous drug, the illusion of uniqueness. And like any drug, the high fades fast, leaving her anxious for the next dose. The one who knows how to deny or ration that illusion with cold precision holds a weapon far more powerful than any flattery, because it turns her into an emotional addict, crawling to recover what she thinks she lost. The need to feel unique makes her easy to control, because she cannot stand the idea of being replaceable. If she senses another woman taking a space she once held, anxiety devours her. If she feels your attention isn't fully hers, she'll play every card to prove no one can compare. And in that desperate effort to stand apart, she exposes herself, psychologically naked. She reveals her insecurities, her patterns, her secrets. That's where the strategist gains his advantage, not through aggression, but by watching her fight her own shadow, the fear of being just another. The key isn't to hand her exclusivity on a silver plate, it's to make her chase it. You don't declare her the only one. You suggest that maybe she isn't. A single calculated doubt wounds deeper than 1,000 compliments. One cold remark, one ambiguous comparison, one quiet pause in your gaze, and her mind fills with tormenting questions. Am I not enough? Is there someone better? In those questions, her confidence bleeds out, and while she tries to extract reassurance from you, her dependence grows stronger. The attractive woman, enslaved by her need to be seen as special, cannot tolerate a man who doesn't place her immediately on a pedestal. Everyone else does, and that's exactly why they mean nothing. But the one who denies her exclusivity, the one who treats her as replaceable, becomes her obsession. Her ego refuses that narrative. She must prove herself unique, and in that frantic chase, she becomes trapped in a game she cannot win. She turns into the pursuer, and you, into the prey that refuses to be caught. At this stage, the strategist must remain cold. The most common mistake is giving in too soon, telling her outright that she's special. That kills the tension. It satisfies her addiction instead of deepening it. The real mastery lies in giving crumbs, an occasional gesture, a half compliment, a brief glance that lifts her, followed by silence that pulls her down again. Thus, you create a loop, a vicious cycle in which she never gets full certainty and therefore never stops chasing it. And the more she chases, the more power she gives away. Ultimately, the need to feel unique is the heaviest chain of them all. The woman who seems so free, so confident, so untouchable, is imprisoned by an invisible hunger. It's not flattery or desire or competition that enslaves her, it's the unbearable truth that without that special confirmation, she is just one among many. And in that abyss, the manipulator finds his final victory, because the one who controls the illusion of exclusivity controls not only her emotions, but her very sense of dignity. She can lose admirers, she can lose her youth, she can lose her rivals, but she will never accept losing the title of the only one. And it is there, in that unspoken fear, where her will finally breaks and your dominance is complete. I have revealed her weaknesses one by one, like slowly opening a chest once thought unbreakable, only to find it filled with cracks. What the crowd worships as perfection, the strategist sees as flesh exposed to the blade. The attractive woman is not invincible. She is, in truth, the most vulnerable of all, because she lives enslaved by the constant need to sustain a power that slips from her hands every second. Her beauty, which appears eternal, is only a temporary loan, a currency that demands constant payment in attention, validation, and admiration. Whoever learns to deny what everyone else gives her without restraint has already bound her with invisible chains. Her need for validation, her fear of time, her competition with others, her obsession with image, her addiction to attention, her ego slavery, her hidden dependency, her terror of abandonment, her weakness before pleasure, her hunger to admire, her insecurity masked as arrogance, her emotional fragility, her digital vanity, her fantasy of submission, and her need to feel unique. These are not isolated flaws. They are threads woven into a single web, a psychological system that turns the attractive woman into the perfect puppet for the man who knows how to pull the strings. Each weakness feeds the next. The fear of aging fuels her need for validation. Her competition with other women intensifies her obsession with beauty. Her emotional fragility strengthens her dependence on social media. What appears to be a fortress of power is actually a chain of glass, and one well-placed strike can shatter it all. The mistake most men make is confusing admiration with strategy. The ordinary man kneels, flatters, begs for attention, and becomes a slave to the very power that consumes her. But the strategist, the man who looks with cold, steady eyes, understands that victory does not lie in competing through worship, but through calculated indifference. In a world where everyone rushes to lift her higher, true domination is found in pulling her down from the pedestal, forcing her to fight for what she once took for granted. It is not a battle of force, nor even of words. It is a silent war, where every word, every pause, every gesture becomes a dose of invisible poison that erodes her certainty from within. The truth is simple. There is no real strength in someone who depends on others to define her worth. The attractive woman has no power of her own. She extracts it from the eyes that admire her, the compliments that sustain her, the validation that feeds her. Control that flow, and you control her world. Withdraw the drug of attention, and she becomes restless prey. Question her exclusivity, and she becomes desperate to prove it. Stand firm and unshaken, and she will surrender even in the fantasy that consumes her most, the desire to yield to a man stronger than herself. Dominion is not about humiliation or destruction. It is about leading her gently toward the realization of her own dependence. The true strategist does not seek to ruin beauty. He learns to turn it against the one who wields it, because those who live by appearance are forever haunted by the fear of losing it. And that fear, that silent, unending terror, is the most powerful chain of all. The attractive woman, far from being the hardest opponent, is in truth the most predictable. Her ego dictates her moves, her insecurity fuels her actions, and her need to feel unique traps her in an endless circle, one from which she can only escape by chasing the man who refuses to be caught. That is why these 15 weaknesses must never be seen as mere observations. They are a manual of control. Each one is a psychological button, an emotional trigger you can press depending on the situation. You do not need to activate them all at once. You only need to choose the one that fits the terrain. Sometimes it will be silence, to confront her craving for validation. Other times it will be the hint of replacement, to strike her fear of not being unique. And sometimes it will be cold dominance, to awaken her secret fantasy of submission. Every move must be calculated, every gesture must have intention. Because strategy is not improvisation, it is patient construction. And here lies the final truth. The attractive woman does not surrender to beauty, nor to wealth, nor to brute strength. She surrenders to Machiavellian intelligence, to the mind that confronts her on the only battlefield she does not control, her own. When you learn to see what hides behind the surface, the anxiety behind her smile, the fear behind her arrogance, the hunger for control behind her supposed independence, you stop seeing her as a goddess and start seeing her as what she truly is, a fragile creature sustained by appearances. And the one who knows how to use those appearances against her ends up possessing not only her attention, but her complete dependence. Thus ends this map of her weaknesses, not as a guide for flattery, but as a handbook for psychological domination. Because the attractive woman may shine before the eyes of many, but only the strategist who understands her cracks will make that light serve him alone. While the rest beg for a glimpse of her glow, you will have learned to use her radiance as a weapon, until she finds herself trapped in the cruelest paradox of all, believing she holds power while already being prisoner to your will.